so why don't we go ahead and I'll call the meeting to order. Mr. Coley, would you note that Commissioner Caballero and Commissioner Hamilton are absent? All others are here. First item is approval of the minutes from the September 15 meeting. Entertain a motion.
So moved.
Moved to approve. Is there a second? Second. Any discussion? Hearing none. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
Okay, opposed? All right. Official action. We'll start with Commissioner Herbert for a report from the nominating committee.
First of all, I want to thank the members of the nominating committee. We had some outstanding candidates. Our process for the term beginning January 1, 2023 began in January of this year when the online application became available on our website. The committee met in August, and advertisements ran in the News Sentinel that month, as well as the advertisement on the KUB website and on social media. The committee evaluated the submitted applications and selected qualified applicants for interviews. The city charter requires that the board provide the mayor at least 5 nominees for each commissioner vacancy. The nominating committee has voted to recommend 6 candidates for submission to the mayor and for your consideration today. Those 6 candidates are Cynthia Gibson, Helen Hennon, David Long, Craig Pickett, Charles Sims, and Bo Townsend.
All right. You've heard the recommendation of the nominating committee. Are there any members of the public who would like to address the board regarding nominations? Okay. Mr. Walker, would you, you're the board secretary, would you please distribute the ballots?
Commissioners, the ballots do reflect the names of all the candidates who submitted qualifying applications. Please vote for at least 5. And you may select from those recommended by the nominating committee.
Yeah.
Or you may select from any other applicant or write-in candidate if you wish. Just please remember to sign your ballots.
Mr. Walker will be tallying the votes here. Report in just a second.
Commissioner Askew, the following candidates received a majority of the votes: Cynthia Gibson, Helen Hennon, David Long, Craig Pickett, Charles Sims, and Bo Townsend.
Thank you, Mr. Walker. These 6 names will be submitted to the mayor along with a complete set of applications received this year. The mayor will then submit her nomination to the city council. And I would like to thank the nominating committee for your good work this year. It was a good process. We got some really great candidates, I think. So thank you all for your work there. All right. Mr. Bolus, Resolution 1465.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Commissioners, I would like to recognize Mark Walker, Senior Vice President, Chief Financial Officer, to present you a consideration for resolution related to our commitment to solar energy from TVA's Green Invest program. Mark.
Yes, thank you, Mr. Bolus. Good afternoon, Commissioners. Today we do present for your consideration a resolution that authorizes the execution of 2 amendments which essentially replace previously executed amendments for the Green Invest program, accounting for purchases or investments of 270 megawatts of solar. over the next several years. And just as some background, you may recall that when we signed our long-term partnership agreement with TVA back in 2020, that did enable us to be a participant in TVA's Green Invest program, which we have taken advantage of, and become one of the, I guess, the leaders in that area. We did enter a series of transactions, what TVA calls tranche amendments, for purchase of solar, for investment in solar over the course of 2020 that accounted for 502 megawatts of new solar to be developed over the next several years. And that does represent about 20% of our total electric supply when all that solar was due to come online. And just to review for you what the the terms were of those original contracts that we executed, there's actually 4 separate sites. 2 of them are located in Mississippi, 2 are located in Tennessee, 1 in Tullahoma, and 1 far west Tennessee in Lake County, which is called Ridgely Farm on the slide. And you can see the various output of megawatts that we were allocated as part of those solar sites. And 2 of those, we were 100% of the solar output, that being Ridgely Farm and Optimist in Mississippi. You can also see the contract prices that for us to pay for the solar per megawatt hour. And it was $1.25 for 3 of the transactions and $1.88 for the Ridgely Farm transaction. And then you see the projected in-service dates, which range from the end of 2022 throughout 2023. So that's what we signed back in 2020 through a series of agreements with TVA. But as you know, a lot has changed in the economy since then. And a lot of industries have been impacted by the pandemic, post-pandemic, and the solar industry is no exception. With a number of factors, supply chain issues, tariffs, reversal of tariffs, and it's just been a host, general inflation, labor shortages. A lot of issues have combined to drive up the cost of solar development over the last 12 to 18 months. And just as projects across the nation are impacted, our 4 projects were impacted as well by those price increases and pressures. So each of the developers of the 4 projects that we had contracts for came back to TVA and basically said, we cannot do it for the price we originally agreed to. Too much has changed, too much has happened. So they did request price concessions and also time concessions, that it was going to take longer to do the project itself. So they approached TVA first because they have an agreement with TVA. And then TVA approached us to let us know of what these price increases would be. I do want to point out that TVA would, the way the economics work, TVA would absorb a portion of those price increases, but we had to absorb a portion as well if we wanted to move forward on that. We did express our somewhat dismay to TVA about the change from the original contract terms. And it went all the way to the top of the TVA's organization, where we expressed our concerns with that. But we talked it through with TVA, and I have some more information to share on that. But ultimately, I think we got to the point where we felt we could move forward with some of these projects. But first, just to show you how did the economics change, and where are we now on each of the 4 projects based upon what the developers have requested with TVA. And some of those original price increases have been negotiated down, and I'd like to think maybe we had something to do with that in putting some pressure on TVA in that regard. But basically everything on here is the same, but let's go over here except for prices and cost and in-service dates. What was $1.25 for a Golden Triangle at the 70 megawatts is now $3.23 per megawatt hour. What was $1.25 for Optimist in Mississippi is now $5.02 per megawatt hour. We'll skip over this one for a moment and go to Tullahoma, and that was $1.25. It's now $3.18 per megawatt hour. Ridgely Farm in Lake County, it's hard to even talk about it, went from $1.88 to $21.88 per megawatt hour. That project is likely not to proceed, and we certainly are not planning to participate in that. But just to show you what the impact of the economics would be, you know, it's an increase from 1.6 million a year to 11.6 million, so a total annualized cost increase of $10 million, which just can't be done. Now, you subtract out Ridgely Farm, then it's not quite as bad. And really what we have talked about as a staff, and I know we shared this with the board at lunch a couple of months ago, as far as what we were thinking in terms of recommending to the board as far as going forward with the Green Invest, was, you know, Ridgely Farm is out, but that we would move forward with the other 3 projects, the 2 in Mississippi and the 1 in Tullahoma. And you can see how those cost increases, you know, now we're looking, as opposed to investing $1.458 million per year, which is what the original terms were, to increasing that to roughly $3.1 million per year. So an increase of about $1.6 million, actually $1.5 million in annualized cost. So we do not make this recommendation lightly. We have looked at our electric financial plan. We believe we can make that work, or we wouldn't be making this recommendation to the board. But also, you know, I think we have, as part of our mission for is environmental stewardship, and we are committed to being a leader in the valley for sustainability, and this is a component of that. So we are recommending to move forward with 3 of those 4 projects.
Hey, Mark, I agree with the decision to remove Ridgely Farms. I think that's just a pretty astronomical price. As we look at the other megawatts, our share of the megawatts, have we thought about redistributing, or did we do that with the new recommendation? So right now we got 70 megawatts at Mississippi over in Golden Triangle, another 200 at Optimus, another 55 at Tullahoma. Had we thought about changing that mix? Could we change that mix to get us our costs down a little bit more, still giving the same number of megawatt hours, but changing?
Well, let's walk through those 3 sites for a moment. The Golden Triangle site, the total output for that site will be 200 megawatts. There are 2 other parties to that. So we're 70 megawatts. There's a private entity that's 100 megawatts, and then there's another utility in the Mississippi area that I think is 30 megawatts, if I have that right. So it's going to be 70, or if we wanted to reduce ours, then somebody else would have to pick that up. But we can't, unless one of those other parties was to back out or something, it's hard to reallocate what our portion is on that.
We encourage some of them to back out. I know people.
Do we have an option to pick, if they do back out or take less megawatts, do we have an option to pick those up?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Yes, sir.
Yeah, particularly Golden Triangle and Tullahoma because of the cost differential.
Right.
So that's really what I was trying to see, if could we reduce over in Optimus and increase over in Golden Triangle and Tullahoma.
The thing about Optimist is that's all ours.
It's all ours.
That's 100% for KUB. If we were wanting to reduce that, then somebody else would have to pick that up.
Okay, so we have.
But
So Optimus is 100% ours.
100%
We
ours.
have 70 megawatts of 200 in Golden Triangle.
Yes, correct.
And I guess we have 55 of how many in
200
of
in
200 in
Tullahoma.
Okay.
There are 3 other parties to the solar development in Tullahoma, and 2 of those have already expressed that they are moving forward. There is another municipality involved in that, and I believe they will move forward. They just have to go. Their process takes a little bit longer than it does for the other entities. So we're waiting to hear on that. But for instance, back to Commissioner Feinbaum's question, in the event that that other party said, you know, not going to do it, we're out, then there's 100 megawatts on the table. You know, we would have to come back to the board and talk about, because then, you know, this becomes a bigger number if we wanted to pick that up.
And are there other farms out there, other solar providers that you could partner with to make the gap up for Ridgely Farm?
I think the Ridgely Farm deal is just going to go away.
Right.
But your point's valid, and we'll touch upon that here in just a moment, really, on this particular slide. Because in the amendments, and what we're bringing forward to you today, Moore County is not included because that one is still, there's a different developer than the two sites in Mississippi. So that's got more parties involved, but we're still working through that process. So today's amendments for your consideration are the 270 megawatts, the two sites in Mississippi. But let's talk about what else the amendments say. And but before I get there, just to mention, because we pushed TVA hard on this, that we don't want to come back to our board again and say, well, you know, it was $5.02 and now it's $6 and we got to change it again. So one thing that I think that helps us is that the developers, in this case, the developer for both sites in Mississippi, has essentially locked in most of their costs on that. So we wouldn't anticipate a price increase. What we are hopefully anticipating is on the other side of it, and that's because in our proposed amendments, we do, in the event that there was a developer default, we do have a higher percentage of liquidated damages. We pushed for that and got that. But really the big thing is that second bullet where it says provide protection for KUB is the Inflation Reduction Act, and that it provides extensions of investment tax credits, other incentives for solar development. We would expect these developers for the sites we're talking about to take advantage of that. And through their contract with TVA and then our contract with TVA, it provides for a sharing of those benefits. So what I would tell you is, though there are no guarantees, that there is a much greater likelihood for these three prices to go down as opposed to them going up. So we felt good about that, and we pushed TVA hard on that, and Mike and others, we worked on that language to get into the amendment. That.
And Mark, that's because of the benefit from that act?
From the investment tax credits, yes.
Okay.
Yes, that. So we feel pretty good about, again, there's no guarantees in this. But again, back to Commissioner Feinbaum's question is, well, what if that other party in Tullahoma decided to walk? You know, then there is an opportunity for us to step in and take that over. I had the math at one time. I think that might add $700,000 to our annualized cost. I may be wrong on that. But that's a decision for another day on that. As I said, I do think that other municipality is going to move forward with that ultimately, though. But I also wanted to touch upon, you know, just looking ahead. I think our ultimate goal, well, our goal of 20% of our power supply coming from solar, renewable sources, is still intact. What this reduction from 502 megawatts to 325 megawatts takes us down to around 13% by the time all the solar generation comes online. But I think there will be other opportunities through Green Invest. We also have our contract flexibility provision as part of our long-term partnership agreement with TVA, which is for 80 megawatts, which we are working on. That'll probably be a combination of on-site or on-system generation and off-system generation, just because there's just not that much land available, flat land in our service territory. You know, the community solar site, which if you're driving down the interstate, you see all those solar panels. It looks pretty big. That's 1 megawatt. So you can imagine what a site would look like if it had 200 megawatts or even 80 megawatts on it. It would be massive. And that's why we often have to go to rural areas where there's a lot of flat land like Mississippi for these sites to be developed on that. So, but point is, we'll be continuing to look to assess opportunities for that in both those fronts. And with the Inflation Reduction Act, which we are digging into ourselves, typically investment tax credits and stuff, those are for private entities. But in the Inflation Reduction Act, it allows municipalities and public entities to benefit, not so much from tax credits, but from direct payments from the federal government as a result of investing in solar. So we're digging into that as well. And then finally, we have our community solar project, which we are still very excited about. It is 1 megawatt, but we are weeks away from actually taking that live, and very excited about that. But yes, sir.
Okay. Based on the increased cost, will there be any adjustments to the consumer solar project for our customers? Are they gonna have to pay more?
For our community solar project, no.
Okay.
No. This is somewhat speculative at this point as we dig through the IRA, but potentially we might be able to get a reimbursement of some of our solar costs for our own small 1 megawatt project, which would translate into a lower price for the customers on that. But that is still to be determined.
As you look at land to build these farms, and I know you need a lot of land, some of my colleagues who are in the agriculture industry have talked about the need to balance where we put these versus not taking away usable farmland. Because you think about our economy, you think about the need to feed people. That's real and true for a lot of our communities. Have we had any of those conversations or discussions? I don't know.
Yeah, I will tell you that I was at the last TVA board meeting, and it was at UT Martin, and a lot of folks came up and had that, they're all for solar, but let's not take away cornfields, to say, or whatever for that. So there's that balance, and so it's going to be, TVA heard it loud and clear. I think it's the whole where's the best place and the balance there, and I think it's great for everything. But I was able to attend that meeting and hear that firsthand. So yeah, your ag campus folks were there and talked about that at length.
That's
so.
a very good point, and that is that is a consideration. Yes, that's a good point. So Resolution 1465, brought for your consideration today, does authorize the execution of 2 tranche amendments with TVA that would replace previously executed amendments for the 270 megawatts of solar. And once we get all the details worked out on the Moore County or the Tullahoma project, we would come back in a few months with a similar amendment for that 55 megawatts. So I'd be glad to answer any other questions.
Before we vote, I would like to just thank the team for negotiating so hard. As you know from our conversations, I'm very cynical about these price increases. In the construction industry, the prices have gone up about 17.4%. If my last number was correct from people who own construction companies, for that kind of construction to go up over 100%, makes me skeptical at best. And so when you note, however, what first came back to us is how much the increase was going to be, when you compare to what we're voting on today, you guys did a great job of negotiating, putting the heat on, and my hat's off to you, even as I remain cynical about whether the people who are actually building these facilities are not having a very big Christmas this year. Yeah. All right, I request a motion for Resolution 1465 on first and final reading.
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
Second. All right, are there any members of the community who'd like to speak on this? All right, very good. Mr. Coley, will you read please call the roll.
Commissioner Askew.
Aye.
Commissioner Feinbaum.
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert.
Aye.
Commissioner Simpson Brown.
Aye.
Commissioner Small.
Aye.
Resolution 1465 is passed.
All right, Mr. Bolus, 1466, please.
Yes, Commissioners, I want to recognize Mark Walker again to update you on an amendment to our procurement procedures. Mark.
Yes, Commissioners. I'll try to be relatively brief here, but we are bringing forth amended procurement procedures for your consideration, and basically it's due to a recent change in state law regarding municipal purchasing limits, raising those limits, by which competitive bidding and public advertisement is required. So we wanted our procedures to match up with what current state law says. So just a little bit of background. Procurement procedures were originally adopted or initially adopted by the board back in 2002 and basically provide overall governance principles for KUB's procurement activities and processes, and do reflect the various purchasing requirements set forth in state law as well. They also authorize the establishment of, which we've had for a long time, of what's called procurement guidelines. And those basically lay out the oversight and the day-to-day activities of our procurement processes on that. And the board delegated the authority to develop the procurement guidelines and amend the procurement guidelines to the president and CEO. So just a little background on the governance there. So what are we requesting? It's relatively simple. And basically we want to raise the purchasing limits that are in our current procurement procedures regarding when you do competitive bidding or when you take 3 written quotes if possible, to match what is now in state law. But I also wanted to point out that we also are requesting is a provision in the resolution and in the procurement procedures that going forward, if there would be future changes in those dollar limits, that authority be delegated to the president and CEO to amend the procedures just in that instance, not for anything else, but just if for another change in the dollar limits, thereby. But important to note is that still requires consultation with the board by going through the board's audit and finance committee before any such amendment would go into effect.
So, talk to us about what the practical implication of this is for us in terms of our efforts to get money into the hands of some of the folks that we've targeted as
Yes,
desirable.
here several charts that show on the limits themselves. So what is changing? How did state law change? So you're looking at 3 categories of purchasing, basically. There's a category of when we don't have to do any competitive bidding whatsoever. Previously, that was up to $10,000. It is now up to $20,000. So our procedures match, what is in state law. There's another category where you make an attempt, if possible, to get 3 written quotes, so some form of competitive bidding. And you can see that price or that dollar range has changed as well. What was $10,000 up to $25,000 is now $20,000 up to $50,000. And then anything above $50,000 or above requires competitive bidding and public advertisement, which previously that was $25,000. So that's what the limits are changing to.
So Mark, when we changed up to 25,000, the last time this happened, these procedures are just edits to that because we did this before, correct? Remember we moved up to $25,000? I thought we did that when we matched this, what the city was doing recently, remember?
That was, I think these limits that have been current state law have been there a long time, Commissioner Small. What we changed a few years ago was introducing the Small Business Enterprise Program.
Okay.
And it had some dollar limits in that as
Up to
far as
25.
regarding
Okay.
that. Yeah.
Okay. So I
Just did that like 2 years ago.
I think this makes sense. This legislation was brought by our very own Sam McKenzie here in Knoxville. So I'm glad that we are doing this. My only kind of sort of trepidation is that it takes the process out of the board, this full board's hands, and gives it to the audit committee. I could live with it, but it just gives me a little bit of pause. So I just want to put that on the record.
I guess our thinking in that regard was that probably these limits would just increase in the future and they wouldn't go down, and that we would just, as opposed to having to come back to the board if they changed them again next year, we would just try to make life easier for you all and just go through, have the president and CEO have that authority, but still reporting to the board of what the change would be, of course.
What I heard was Commissioner Small requesting to be chair of the Finance and Audit Committee.
That will be
That's what I heard. Is that not what you said?
duly noted in the minutes. We can do that, yeah.
There has been no
Okay. So I did want to also talk to you all about what are next steps. Today's amending the procedures. We also would need to amend the procurement guidelines because the limits are in there as well. But the procedures allow for the limits and the guidelines, of which is what we actually use, to be less than those maximum amounts. And historically, that has been the case for KUB. So what we're proposing is, as far as no competitive bidding, is to go to that up to $15,000, 3 written quotes, 15 to 50, and 50 and above. So you might ask, well, what are our current guideline limits? Okay, 0 to 5,000, so we'll be increasing that by $10,000, and you can see when we're obtaining 3 written quotes. The idea, and we talked about this a lot, we have a procurement oversight committee here at KUB, and I'm part of that, several members of executive staff. And we thought it would be better to step into this as opposed to going the full way. We have a lot of new managers, we have a lot of new folks that are, purchasing goods and services now, and going all the way from $5,000 to $20,000, we just felt that was maybe too big a step at this point in time, and that we would do this on a gradual basis. So go first from $5,000 to $15,000, and then we could go to $20,000 at some point in the future. We just wanted to see how it goes. Because as far as the number of dollars and transactions by which we would not competitively bid that we have been, whether it's through quotes or whatever, is going to change. There's a lot more transactions going into this bucket than has been previously. So procurement really doesn't have control over that. We can track it, but that's really the individual managers and purchasers making those decisions. So as opposed to, it's just what our gut instinct said, as opposed to going from 5 to 20, let's go 5 to 15 and monitor it. And then if everything goes well, we can increase it again in the future.
I would want us to mirror that legislation, and I get that we need to take time to do that, and I understand that, but I don't want this to be approved and then 20 years from now we're still there and not with
I
the
understand.
limits to the legislation. So
I
how
think
do we
it's
guarantee that? Do we come back in 18 months? Do we come back in 24 months and revisit?
What
I
I
would
would
want us to do that.
What I would think, Commissioner Small, is that these new limits would go into effect January 1st of 23, that we give it a year and see how things go. And we just had so many new folks on this. And then, again, you're taking a decent amount of transactions now out of the hands of the procurement process, and see how it goes. And if there's no major hiccups or issues or such, then we could come back and easily increase that to $20,000, in a year or whenever we so chose
And
to
actually,
do that.
if this passes, the president CEO will then have that authority.
That is
too.
correct. Could do that at any time,
Okay.
upon notification to the Audit and Finance.
Finance Committee.
So is the fear that, not fear, I wouldn't say fear, hesitancy, concern, because of the new staff that are in these positions, that the large amount would want to make sure that everything is going well and that there are no audit issues?
Exactly, it's a
Yeah,
training.
it's part of it, it's a control issue, and that, our established procurement processes and everything is, there's less going through that procurement. And I think we would just like to take it sort of slow and see how that goes. Now, there's a lot of training and education that needs to go into this anyway. I mean, you're going from 5,000 to 15,000, that opens quite a bit. So if we're thinking the dollar amount, going back, and so what was in this bucket is about $5 million a year. Okay, so what will be in this bucket is about $15 million a year. So it's about $10 million, and that's going to be a whole lot of transactions that make up that additional $10 million.
What was going to that other bucket of 19? How much of that? You said 5, then 15. If we go to the left of that,
To the left of that,
if we were to do it right now to the 19,
I would have to estimate on that because I didn't run the numbers, but I would say, 20,
20 million?
20 plus. I just don't know.
Okay.
But that's our recommendation, but
Yeah, I have one other question. It's just out of curiosity. So what would you estimate as far as the original 0 to 5,000? What's the average number of transactions in that range versus what you would anticipate in the new range?
in the existing range,
Yes.
it's about $5 million a year.
Number of
Okay.
transactions.
How many transactions?
I'm sorry, I'm asking something.
No.
That just came to me.
I know it.
Question? That too.
Yeah, if you can bear with me, I've got it here somewhere. I had the dollars in my head, I just didn't have the
This I promised before.
transactions in my head, so. As far as transactions, you're looking at about 1,000, about 1,100 transactions.
In one fiscal year.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay.
Well, I'm excited about this because it really will. I think it has the great potential to help us with some of our goals with getting more business to women and minority-owned businesses. And I would just say, with so many new people, that what I want to make sure that they are brought into our culture and understand how much the board is committed and the staff is committed to supporting the women and minority businesses, so
Well-
that they are always looking for opportunities.
I think that's a good point, and it does provide, that flexibility, and I think this dovetails somewhat, to our MBE and WBE and SBE programs, and that these limits, we need to work together on that, because I do think that probably provides greater flexibility and more opportunity to increase the number of minority and women-owned business
Sure.
participants, vendors for KUB.
All right, anything else? Okay, I'll entertain a motion on Resolution 1466 on first and final reading.
So moved.
Second?
Second.
Any members of the public like to speak? Okay. Mr. Coley?
Commissioner Small,
Aye.
Commissioner Simpson Brown,
Aye.
Commissioner Herbert,
Aye.
Commissioner Feinbaum,
Aye.
Commissioner Askew.
Aye.
Resolution 1466 is passed.
Thank you all. Okay, Mr. Bolus, time for your report.
Yeah, I'd like to recognize myself for the next presentation. So, anyway, in all seriousness, I wanted to give you an update on the community advisory panel and a little bit about what's been going on there for the last 2 years, and provide you some detail from that group. It's been a great 2 years so far through that committee. So, a bit about it. It's been exactly 2 years ago this month that the board approved the creation of the community advisory panel, and the idea was to have two-way communication between our customers, a diverse group of customers, and our board and our staff as we look forward and different things. And so we've had a good group of folks get together for, like I said, 2 years, and we've had a lot of dialogue, a lot of conversation, and we'll give you kind of an update on what that's been like. So since we began in 2021, our first meeting was in 2021, right in the midst of, I guess, the hardest part of COVID. So it was virtually, that first few meetings. And we start with just system overviews, kind of the gas, water, wastewater, electric systems, general overviews about, the size, shape, color of our systems. We did a facility tour, very similar to the ones you all did on your first days at KUB as a board member. It's always a big success, and it kind of gets behind the curtain of our facilities and all the things we maintain and build and run every day. We then went to presentations throughout that. We did talk about our customer assistance programs, because at that point they were brand new, a lot of funding through our TVA, through the federal government, through our monies to help folks with utility bills. So that was one of our first topics at that point. We then proceeded to the fiber broadband proposal. Right before we came to you all for final approval, we asked for their input on that fiber, the idea of doing fiber and broadband. We got a lot of great feedback from them. We also presented to them our budget that year, just to, once again, high level of all the things we do and the things we fund every year to maintain our utility systems. They asked for a outage response, storms, how do we handle storms? And our staff did a great job just going through the process of, when it falls down, we put it back up, and how we do that and restore power throughout our entire system. But then the big discussion that they really wanted to hear from was on rate design. And so for a good period of time this last year, we talked about rate design. That began a year ago in October. We began with a series of just conversations about what rate design looks like on a high level, more nationally, philosophically, and how it's done, the art and science, if you want to call it that, of rate design. We then proceeded to some KUB specific rate design and how we've done it for years at KUB and our process. Mike Bowen led that effort for about 4 meetings and answered a lot of good questions. Once we finished up with our sessions, we then allowed folks like the Southern Alliance Clean Energy, Dr. Smith and his staff, did a series of presentations on alternate rate designs throughout the country. And then Kent Minot at Sierra Club did a presentation on other alternate designs. Once again, all about how others do rates and how they're structured and how they've done them over years. This past October, so this a few weeks ago, our facilitator then took all those recommendations we had over the course of a year and put them in a document, which is in your folder, a very detailed document, verbatim of what they wanted you all to consider and hear from that community advisory panel. And so that's what you have. And what I'll do in the next slide is, my clicker's not working. There it goes. I am not going to speak on behalf of that group, but I am going to give you I call it the high level topics that were very important to that panel and their input to that. The big thing we heard a lot was the basic service charge on its impact on energy efficiency and low-income customers. Another one was the assistance needs for utility bill assistance for low-income customers, something we've been doing for years, but the need is continue to be there and more of that. A lot of discussion about energy efficiency programs for low-income customers. The best way I put that is those who can't afford to do energy efficiency, how do they get the means to do that? Of course, we have a lot of programs we're doing currently, but more can always be done. Alternative rate design. I mentioned before the 2 groups that presented. There are tiered rates. There are different tiered energy charges and customer service charges that are out there, and want to make sure that we knew about those and want you to consider those in the future. And then additional items at the bottom there, further analysis on how rate design impacts low-income customers, more information there. A discussion at some point about non-residential. This is all residential discussion, so your commercial industrials, we didn't get into those details because that's a whole nother level of demand charge and standby and all those things that are just a whole other wrinkle that we have not gotten into. And then some zoning changes about, how does the density and costs of utilities, that's a hot topic across not just Knoxville, but all across the country. And so that was presented to us also for you all to consider. And for those of you that came, you heard that firsthand. One thing that was expressed was understanding how the CAP feedback will be received by the board and used by the board. And so, as I said before, we provided the details of their input in your packet. It's like I said, it was verbatim for what was said, and they looked at it and approved. I would say that I will tell you firsthand from the rates point of view. Staff has made a commitment that anytime if we are proposing any new rate increases, we will bring back these very suggestions that were presented by the CAP about different rate designs, about different rate structures, and about the customer service charge in itself. Do we need to change it? And so that's on our plate. As you know, as the board approved a couple of years ago, we're not changing our customer service charge no sooner than 2026. And as you also know, we've projected no rate increases for a while. I want to hold to that as long as we can. But we do want to consider all those things when they come available. And so I will say that the groups have been engaged. I appreciate their input. I appreciate those of you who have been at some of those meetings to hear it firsthand. And I will say that it's been very beneficial, and I appreciate what's been going on so far. So any questions you may have, obviously a lot of staff was there, and I'm glad to answer the best I can. But once again, I'm trying to give you an unfiltered presentation on what was said, and the details are in your packets as we speak. So,
Gabe,
yes.
I just thank you for this. This is helpful. The only observation I make is that as I look at the people who have come, it looks like they represent organizations, and I know that sometimes organizations have things that they want to identify and champion because of a cause. And so I'm glad that there is some additional information, particularly from CAP members, that talk about how how certain decisions will affect other folks. Mm-hmm. Because I do think that as we claim to want to support low income and people of color, and to not hear and see their voice in some of the presentations that have happened already at at those CAP meetings. I think it's telling to me. So I'm glad that at least we get to see both sides, so we understand how these decisions might affect people and affect all people, including people who might be purported to be supported in this, but it might have some undue pressure on them. So, and many times those people are working and are trying to live life and can't come to meetings and present points that I think might counter some of the things that might come through them. So I'm glad that we were able to do that in this report.
And one thing we our facilitator did a really good job was, make sure everybody had some say. I mean, the goal is to have input from everybody, all sides, all different backgrounds and experiences. And so that was very much encouraging. And, we captured it, the facilitator captured all that in that document that you have. I will say that all the presentations, all the videos, all the notes and minutes are on our webpage for anybody to see at any time. Once again, that's what we're about. And so as we further into this endeavors in the next few years, there's a lot of stuff in there that's, it's very intriguing. And what's next? As I said, we're going to continue to have weatherization. That's a huge topic right now. And we see the impacts of that. We've done 2,200 homes in Knoxville already. And we are now needing more folks to get signed up. And so getting that word out is very important. So we've already convened a group of the same people in this committee to help us get that word out to those folks, asking them for their help to make sure folks know that weatherization dollars are out there and the contractors are ready to work. There'll be no meeting in December, a little bit of a holiday break. We'll come back in January of 2023 with what's next, what do you want to tackle, talk about, involve, discuss, educate, learn, listen. All those things are very important to us. So I will say that, it's been 2 years. It's given where it started with COVID and all that stuff and how we had to do it virtually and then going back to live. It's been a lot's going on in a short amount of time, but it's been very beneficial to our community, to our folks. I think they've gone back and asked for input and brought it back to us and brought it back to you all. And so I really appreciate it.
Abe, I just will say this. I talked to several of the neighbors in my area, and they want to watch those meetings online, but our service for internet is so slow that we can't seem to get it downloaded. So if you just keep Norwood in your thoughts and
I will
prayers.
defer those questions to Jamie Davis.
Jamie, give him Jamie's home number.
That's right. No, I do appreciate it. Yes.
Well, I would just say that I think we have a better understanding of what some of the alternatives are out there.
That's absolutely
I
right.
thought that our SACE and the Sierra Club did a good job of articulating what their position is, given their priorities, and I know a lot more. I'm leaving the board at the end of the year, but I think all of us who listen to those presentations now have a more global idea of what the options are out there and what the impacts of those options may be on our customers. And finding that balance always between environmental stewardship and price to our customers is going to be important. I think we're better prepared to make those decisions now. So I appreciate what CAP's done and I look forward to the future. Okay.
Well, I've got you all here. We were just notified of another award. We received a national award that I was able to attend and accept on behalf of KUB. But I want to say, first of all, it was given to us by the Alliance to Save Energy. And it really starts with the fact that the board has been so supportive for so many years on all of our energy efficiency programs. We do a lot. I talk about it a lot. We will continue to do more. But we received an award that was nationally known. It's called the Supernova Star Award for Energy Efficiency. It was held in Washington, D.C., so I went up there to receive the award on behalf of KUB and all of our partners, which you see at the bottom of the
How'd you
page.
get James Bond to represent us?
Yeah, that's right. That's great. That's awesome. The keynote speaker was the Secretary of Energy, Jennifer Granholm. So it was a big event. We were one of 2 utilities in the country recognized for an award.
One of how many?
Wow.
One of 2. San Antonio, CPE in San Antonio received an award. But it really was, it's a partnership. It was CAC, it's TDOT, it's our friends at the City of Knoxville and TVA that received the award as a whole. And we were, and so those folks in the picture with me, actually, the fellow to the left, to my right, left of the picture, is from CAC, and the 2 folks to the right are from TVA, who kind of oversee the programs from their side. So we went together and accepted the award. It really was a really nice event, and it just goes to show you that what you all are allowing us to do and giving us the authorities to do is making an impact to our community, but it's also nationally recognized by folks. So appreciate that. Like I said it before, we're not done. We're not even close. We've got more things to do. The folks in our CAP have given us ideas. We'll talk about those the next few months and see what we can do more and figure out that balance. And I just want to say that thank you to our partners. Obviously, we can't do it by ourselves, and they make it really good. So want to make that as our kind of my final closing slide today.
So Gabe, who keeps the award?
Right now, we've got it.
Yeah.
But good question.
They're gonna have to fight.
gonna
You
fight
know why
for
all,
it,
you know
yeah.
why all the doors are locked.
Great question, Tanya. We'll share.
No,
Because it really is a really a joint.
Okay,
project.
are there any members of the public who wish to address the board today? Okay, hearing none. We'll let everyone know, as usual, following the adjournment of this meeting, the board will have lunch across the hall, and that session is open to the public to observe. And any further business? Hearing none, this meeting is adjourned.